Hello and welcome to episode 91 of Jung at HARP. Today we're going to talk about blues, Jung, Carl Jung, and fundamentals in general. I am Deborah Henson-Conant. I'm a composer and a Whoops, apparently I have to make that not sound. Okay, good. Back to us. You know what? I'm just going to start that all over again.
This is the beauty of being live.
Right. So just so you know, this is the first time we've done this on YouTube, and we're in a transition period. We've been hosting this for about 2 years on Facebook, and we're shifting over to YouTube because we're also expanding into a podcast and not just a video cast. And we're working with someone who it's going to be much easier if we post this on YouTube, and so that's how we're going to do it. So I'm going to start again. Ready? Here we go. Hello and welcome to episode 91 of Jung at HARP. Today we're going to talk about blues, Jung as in Carl Jung, and fundamentals in general. I'm Deborah Henson-Conant. I'm a composer and a performer, and I'm here with Kathleen Wiley, who is a Jungian psychoanalyst. We both play the harp, and so we call this Jung at HARP. Each week, we get together at 9 a.m. and figure out what we want to have a conversation about. What do we want to explore? What have people asked us to explore? And we look at that from the sides of our lives, from the side of music, the side of psychoanalysis, and all the people that we've worked with, all that we've learned. So this week, I'm about to launch a challenge for harpists, and hoping to get about 1,000 harpists into this challenge, where I'm teaching blues, which is a very fundamental form of music. It creates a pattern that supports creative expression, and it's one of the simplest and most powerful patterns in all of music. And part of what makes it so powerful is that it is so simple that there is no barrier to entry. It is a human form of expression that does not require you to be a whatever trained musician in order to be absolutely expressive in it. And we wanted to open that up and talk about this because, Kathleen, in the work that you do, people don't need to know anything about Jung in order to benefit from what you're teaching and and it's not even teaching, let's just ask, what is it that you are doing when you work with analysands? You're not teaching them. It's a kind of uncovering, right?
Yeah, it's a journey. I sometimes say I'm like the wilderness guide. You want to go into the wilderness of your unconscious, and I've not been in the wilderness of your unconscious, but I've been in the wilderness of the unconscious hundreds of thousands of times. So it's kind of like I know the lay of the land. I know what things look like. I know how things work to some degree. And so I am like the guide that goes in with you into your psyche to see what's there and how things work. And the process of that, you come up in a way with your own manual. You begin to see how you work. And so Jung once said that every individual psyche needs its own manual, that there is the generic psyche, the generic blueprint or structure, but then each individual is nuanced and fleshed out in a different way, just like the physical skeleton of our body. And just like with blues, there's a basic structure, but each blues tune is also fleshed out in a very different individual way.
Yeah,
But
and
the
that's what you
structure is
just
the basic.
Yeah, and what you just said is really interesting to me because one of the things that I've been talking about in Hip Harp Academy, which is where I teach improvisation through many different forms, is through these forms to discover what is natural for your body. So instead of learning a piece of music where you're learning something that somebody else created, which is also great, it's a beautiful place to start. It's to find out what's natural for you. So for example, if we're learning a blues structure, I can show some ways that you might create a rhythm harp, um, but it could also be, or it could be this. It's the same thing. It's the same thing in terms of the function that the role that that plays in the music. If I'm playing rhythm instead of melody, this is a melody. That's like a blues melody, but this is creating the foundation. And when you're playing with other people or when you're playing with yourself, you're going to play there's going to be a foundation there as well as the melody or the embellishment. And what I'm trying to say here is that when we have a very simple pattern like the blues, which I'm not going to show you today, but you can learn it in the challenge, it allows us to start finding what works for our body. And the reason I thought about this is when you said that you're using Jung's principles to help each person find the manual for themselves. And that is exactly what I'm doing in the academy as well when I'm teaching. I mean, I did it for myself and my life to find what is my vocabulary? What is the vocabulary of human expression that this body, this voice naturally does? And what do I naturally do with this instrument? And now how can I help other people find that? And one of the easiest ways to do that is to take a simple form that is easy to learn. Like, and I'm thinking, when people come to work with you, they don't have to learn how to come into your office. They don't have to learn how to sit down. It's all about what happens between you.
Yes, and actually, what happens in the process of being together and the relationship is my way of being with them, which is shaped by all that I've learned through training as a Jungian analyst and various other disciplines have studied and still study, is they internalize a way of being with themselves so that they then begin to be able to be with these structures, these foundational bits of who they are in a different way and in a way that's more life-giving. And part of what you're doing with the Hip Harp Academy and all of what you teach is you are modeling and sharing a way of being with the music that people can internalize to find their way of being with the music.
Correct.
And there are certain principles, whether it's how I sit and work with the unconscious or how you sit and work with, say, the structures of the blues, that apply for all of us if we're going to encounter the unconscious or play the blues. But each of us then takes that and finds our own relationship to it. One of the things you said when you were talking in the beginning, and I wrote it down, you said no barrier to entry.
Right.
And you
That's
said
right.
that about teaching the blues. And so much of what I do in my work as a one-on-one with people and the work that I facilitate through the online sacred circles and the essential embodiment circle is helping people clear out the barriers to really knowing what's going on inside of them.
Whoa, you just made me realize that the only barrier to entry with the blues is thinking that you can't, or
Uh-huh.
thinking that you're not allowed to, or thinking that it has to be a certain way. That is the only barrier. And I'm assuming that's what you're talking about in our lives as well. We've created having big epiphany. I mean, because I was just in New York in April with my show, The Golden Cage. It is all about the barriers that we create. And the final song says, we build the cage from dreams that died and every heartache that we ever held inside. We forge the bars from every pain and sorrow that we've known. And in our cage, we are alone. And that's the fundamental concept of the play. And you just made me realize that in both of the work that we do, just like that play talks about what it takes for that barrier to be
Mhm.
not broken, but to be what is that called when somebody gets through that barrier? That you and the show is about that, but all our work, your work and my work, is about that with human beings. Each person to get through those barriers, those self-imposed barriers, using simple forms so that people can be self-expressed and bring the richness of who they are, the resonance of who they are into the world.
Yeah, I'm thinking that, Jung said that each of our psyches has a gradient that our libido, our psychic energy or life force, that's what libido means in a Jungian sense of the word, that each of our psyches has a gradient that our life force will follow if left unobstructed. And that when those obstructions get set in place, usually by the time we're 4 or 5, because those patterns form very early and are formed unconsciously. We don't deliberately decide. Now, as we grow older, we may sometimes reaffirm those things that got unconsciously put in place because they feel like they help keep us safe. But those kinds of templates, those kinds of obstacles and barriers that we're working with in depth psychology are those things that are really put in place vis-a-vis the unconscious probably the first 4 years of life. And people often aren't even aware of them. And they don't even realize that they think they're choosing something and it's what they want. But it's because instead of being able to access this much of who they are caught in the cage only accessing this much. So they aren't even aware of the other energies and their psyche that might want something different until they intrude. And that's
Right,
usually what gets people in my office. They intrude with states of consciousness people don't want, like depression or
right.
anxiety, or they intrude with relationship problems and all
It's
kinds of
it's
traumatic relational interactions, or they intrude with accidents or illnesses
right,
or outer world events like suddenly being fired or a developmental task of like being, at the age you have to retire, and then suddenly all this stuff comes out. So, but the no barrier to entry, I think, is such a beautiful phrase to hold, in that what ultimately I want in my life every day I wake up, I don't want any barriers to really enter and connect with my
right,
deepest self and let that flow. And when I sit at the harp, I don't want barriers to block
right,
me from playing what I want to play in the moment,
right.
whether it's a tune that I have, somebody else wrote, or a traditional tune that's been handed down, or I'm improvising.
You know, it's interesting because as you're speaking, I'm thinking that playing music is like a petri dish of all the stuff that comes into our head. And what's happening at every moment when we're saying, I did that wrong and blah, 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 blah. And it's just, you can literally think like, I'm going to sit down for 5 minutes with my instrument and I'm pretty much going to beat myself up. I think that's what a lot of people do. And part of, I realized as you were talking, I thought, the blues is really interesting because not only is it a form of music that was created in a very unusual, interesting way, but it is also like a mantra.
Mm-hmm.
It can be incredibly expressive in many different ways, but it is not about the complexity of form. It is not about the complexity of crafting something. I heard a musician say something this morning. He said, it's just on the radio, he said something like, you know, you, I had it that I could go into my room and I could perfect something and then come out. He said, but the fact is, when you go into that room to perfect it, you can never get out.
Amen.
Right. and 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 this is one of the powers of the form, the simplicity of the form of the blues, that it it is not about going into your room and perfecting. There is nothing to perfect there. It's all about having a form for self-expression. Are there riffs that you can learn? Yes. In fact, that's what I teach in the five, in what is it, however long the challenge takes you. It doesn't matter. It's not even a challenge. It's just a fun thing. But there are things that you can learn, but they're really just starting places, so that you don't have to sit there and be like, well, what do I do now? It's like, start here, and start here, and start here, and start here, and start here. You don't have to remember anything, because you can always start there again. You could start from the same place for the rest of your life. In fact, you do. Every morning, you wake up in the same person body and you start from the same place.
Yeah. I, my mind, I'm having two converging thoughts, but one of them is when you said that, people don't typically think, oh, I'm going to sit down at my heart for 5 minutes and beat myself up, but that's what they do. And the same is true, people wake up and maybe, as soon as they wake up, like early morning, I had roofers at my house, and it can be real easy all of a sudden for a negative thought pattern to get in place, or some uncomfortable body sensation gets activated, and so then one starts to have negative self-talk about that, and all of a sudden we're derailing ourselves because of how we're responding to what's going on inside of us. And so the essential embodiment practices that I teach help people break it down to being able to really pay attention and track what's happening, so you can interrupt those kinds of self-talk patterns, as well as shift into different bodily states of consciousness, because we are all driven unconsciously. We're not in charge of ourselves. We like to think we are, but I mean, I don't know about you all, but I've already had experiences in my body mind today, and things have gone in ways that I wouldn't have necessarily chosen consciously, but there it was. And Jung said that our conscious ego is like a speck of light surrounded on all sides by darkness.
Mm.
And so one of the fundamentals of Jungian psychology is building a conscious relationship to the unconscious. That our ego, our light self, that which we are conscious of, begins to pay attention to and be aware of and open up to that which is yet to be known about oneself, and that which is making itself known in the moment.
I'm what you're saying is just, I don't know if it's the coffee I drank this morning or the conversation, but it's just, I've been thinking of two different things as you were speaking. One about the having a chance to reset, and then the other is about having, like you said, that speck of light, having a place to be where the connection can happen. And I mean, I'm gonna sing a simple blues. I'm gonna keep the pattern very simple. And one of the beautiful things is that in a moment it's all going to reset. No matter what I did, I can start all over again. 2, 3, 4, start it all again. I start from this moment. I start from this moment, and then it's this moment. And if I get lost, I can wait until it comes around again. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, start it again. One more time. So I can keep starting once again, one more time. It can be as simple as that. It can get very complex, and it can come back to that. But it can be, when you talk about embodiment practices, and one of the things I love about this instrument and all instruments is that they extend my body. They give my fingers a way to sing, and it's a connection between, gives the harp a way. My fingers give the harp a voice. The harp gives my fingers a voice. And when I'm really allowing myself to be there in that, and it can become very mantra like to go over and over until I have created that place of safety and grounding. So if I can make a commitment to not beat myself up while I'm doing, to let it go around and around, to reset over and over every time I come back to the beginning of the form, I am creating a place of safety for creative expression in my life. And
Yeah, and part of what we have ultimately our only safe place is within ourselves, but yet how many people really feel safe in their own body mind?
right,
We grow up in a culture that really does demonize our body, and people are all the time, people will sometimes come in my office and say, this and this has happened, and I want to get back to what I felt like before all this happened. And I'll say, well, I can't help you. I mean, you know,
right,
because ultimately the only safety and the only freedom of creative expression we have is in this moment, where we are in this moment. The problem is most people really aren't in this moment. Most people are still stuck back in some
right.
past experience vis-a-vis their central nervous system. They've got some repetitive thought pattern going on because of historical events. So to really get in this moment, but when we do that, and I'm thinking about your riffs as being a way of coming back to this moment,
Right,
the
right.
rhythm in our body, that rhythm is
Mm,
our heartbeat, coming back to this. And one of the practices is to work with rhythmic breathing, pairing your breath to your heartbeat so that
wow.
you're breathing into 4 heartbeats and out to four
Mm.
heartbeats. Really feeling being in rhythm with one's own nature, and how important that is as we live our lives, and how important it is when we sit at our instruments. Um, yeah.
I'm thinking about that breath, and I'm thinking about the rhythm, and I'm thinking about the no barrier to entry, and one of the things that, and I'm also thinking about as we start coming out of some places in the world are coming out of the pandemic, that the opportunity. Well, actually, I'm going to come back in this. When you said we can eventually create a safe place within ourselves,
Mhm.
I thought, right, and then and if we can then bring that out to others, that's the way to go. And one of the beauties of a simple form like the blues, or other jam forms that I teach, but the blues is the most throughout the world that you can play the blues, is that it creates that place of communication. It creates the contain. We talk about containers a lot. That container for communication. So in this blues challenge is different than all my other challenges. In the other challenges, you learn how to do something yourself. In this challenge, you're given a blues audio tape to start with, so that you're learning how to listen as you play. You're learning how to embody that as you play, so that as we come out into the world, we have that thing. It's like a game to play. Like if you meet other kids when you're little, if you have a game that you both know, you can play it immediately. If you don't have a game that you don't know, it's often more difficult to play. And this gives you a game to play. Again, no barrier to entry. It's not like, well, I know how to play the Mendelssohn, and you have a violin and we can play it together. No, it's like, do you have a single string, or do you have a voice, or do you have a pencil that you can make rhythm with?
Mhm.
Then we can make music together, and we can be inside of this container that gives us freedom.
I'm thinking about, I had an interesting experience about a month ago at the gym. I had my earbuds in as I was listening to something on my phone, and all of a sudden, one of your soundscapes from Strings of Passion that I had downloaded came up, and I'm going to say that a roofer just pulled in my driveway, and that
Okay.
may mean my little dog barks. But if she does, I'll mute and grab her real quick. And it
Okay.
may,
All right.
she may not. She's sleeping. Um, but I was listening to it, so all of a sudden here I am doing my my arm weights, and that comes up, And I found myself either able to jam with it, singing in my head and out loud in a way I'd never felt safe enough in myself to do at the harp. Because my idea of not having the technical skill or not fumbling my fingers would get in the way. And it was a very interesting experience. And after that happened, I came home and set up my harp, and it was a different experience. Now, I'm not really sure what that has to do with what we're talking about, except it has something to do with listening in a way that there aren't any barriers to entry. And because this came on when I was relaxed, because I'd done my aerobic workout and now I was doing weights and I was feeling good, I was there. I was able to join in the rhythm of it and have my own self-expression with it in a way that I hadn't. So,
As you're speaking, I'm thinking about the power of the group, because that tape was representing the power of the group.
mhm.
And the tape in the blues challenge will represent the power of the group. And as a child, I had the power of the group. I had adults playing music, and I could just play, and I was playing something good. That was enough, and it is enough. And I suddenly flashed on these movies that, as a kid, and we go into deepest Africa and everybody's playing the drums in a circle. And I never really understood, because I grew up in an environment of music where, well, it's about how good are you, I mean, it was about playing. Folk music was about playing with people, but actual music, it was about how good you are, how impressive you are, people sitting there listening to you. And so to see groups of people playing drums, later in life, I began to understand that what they were creating was the rhythm of life
Mhm.
for children and for adults to come back to that rhythm of life, and to know that your drum beat, your thing that you hit, is part of that. It fits in. It doesn't have to be, it's not about being this crafted, amazing thing that you go in your room and create and then go out and it's perfect and yay, you're great. And the blues is a gift. It is a gift given, especially to anybody who's grown up playing classical music, to be able to have a new relationship to music.
Mhm.
And what I'm hearing when you're talking about your embodiment practices of breathing in relationship to your heartbeat, that I hear it. That's when I got that image of
Mhm.
these movies as a kid, of actually here, because what you talked about was two rhythms that fit within each other and that are part of each other. One that's going this fast, and is a percussive rhythm of your heartbeat. One that is like the extension of the voice, because the voice can extend. And so when you are doing what you just said, breathing for 4 beats of your heart, you are engaging in a musical experience of ensemble within yourself. And
Yeah.
in an incredibly simple way, for which there is no barrier to entry. And the blues gives that same, and it's really interesting because there's a lot of fours in that as well. And I know you may have to leave and go get your dog from the roofers.
You did a little bit of an error. Yeah, I mean, part of what I also want to say is that the drum is the instrument of the heart. Angeles
Right,
Arian, who was a cultural anthropologist, she said that the drum, it mimics the heartbeat. And so,
right.
it is
Mm,
interesting. Sometimes harpists will talk about, using their soundboard to drum as a
right,
percussion instrument. And
right,
it's the idea that how do we let ourselves really relax enough to find our own rhythm in relationship to someone else's rhythm? Let's
right,
just say,
right,
and if you're playing music in a jam or in an ensemble, then part of what you are doing is you're finding how you're each bringing your own individual rhythm and weaving it
right,
together, you
right,
know?
right. And we talked about this earlier. We're talking about
Yeah,
the difference between a me and a we,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that we're finding that. And the other thing, that when you talked about that embodiment practice of our heartbeat and our voice. And it reminded me of the very first music that we ever create, which is our first cry or our first breath. And that is the moment where we connect the fundamental of our heartbeat to the fundamental of our voice. And
And it's
that,
organic.
yes,
It's
and
organic. And I think that's, if we can
right.
remember that with our creativity and our self expression, it is organic, it's natural. And so a lot of the fears, and most of the fears we have about our instruments, as well as how we live our life, are not natural.
Right, right. I know we need to wrap this up. We're coming to the end of our time. So I want to go back to what we call this, which is blues, Jung, and fundamentals. And I want to also bring in your embodiment practices, because I'm about to do a challenge and a whole summer of teaching blues and jams, which are similar to that, vamps, which are like that. And you have your essential embodiment practices. And then as a musician, I'm exploring that at ever more complex areas. And you're also, with your analysis, exploring it in more complex areas. So we're teaching the fundamentals of this organic process and
Yes.
how to connect with it in an organic way. So the blues really lets you connect with music in an organic way that's so much like what you said about the breath and the heartbeat. And then knowing that once you make that connection to the fundamentals, the foundations, then it can expand infinitely. And that is self-expression.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and I often say what we do is the work of psychic gardening when it comes
Right.
to our own individuation process and living into our fullness and those obstacles clearing away. We can't make that happen. Our ego doesn't have that much power, but we can do the work of psychic gardening. So we can pull
Right.
weeds. We can say no to that thought. Cancel, cancel. We can put on fertilizer. We can hold the images of what we want, and we can, you know, visualize that.
We
So,
can plant
in this,
seeds.
yeah, and in a way, that's, I think, when music happens, in too, is that we don't make music happen,
Right.
but all of these things we do with technique and skill and hearing the song and our expression somehow is the musical gardening that then allows the music to happen.
And what I realized when you were speaking is to just bring this full circle is that then we are lowering the barrier to expression. No, there is no barrier to expression. Okay, and on that note, all right. On that note, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And there is no barrier to self-expression here.
No barrier to
Okay.
self-expression.
Okay, Kathleen, thank you so much for this conversation. As always, I just feel like I've gone someplace and discovered someplace in myself through the conversation. And thank you to everybody who's joined us this morning. And we look forward to seeing you for episode 92 next week of Jung at HARP.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.